Call the meeting to order at 6:30.
Yeah, I think so too.
Couple of notes. First, Senator, nice to see you. If the Senator arrives, I feel safe in calling the meeting to order.
Oh, John.
Chair sees that there is a quorum present. So the first item on the business is to review the minutes from the last meeting and to thank our good friend Matt Campbell once again for his great work on putting these together. And to introduce Alan, who is now our new victim for the foreseeable future. We appreciate you being here, and we'll be pleasant, but we talk a lot, so good luck. Does anybody, any thoughts, discussion on the approved minutes, or the draft minutes, rather? Hi, Paul.
I had a couple of things.
Yes.
Just noticing the members present, I don't think Mike Gorski was here. I think Dave Johnson was here for DEP.
Okay.
And he was mentioned also on page 2 a couple of times. And that's significant to me because we then go on to talk about Yankee Row, and he actually participated in that, so I think he would have had a lot more to say.
Where is it on?
So it's NDCAP members present.
Yeah, I
and
got that
he's-
one.
Okay, so he's there, and then on page 2, the first paragraph, the fourth from the last line, it starts with Mr. Gorski,
So that should be,
and it should be Mr. Johnson, I think. And then,
Line 39.
oh, thank you. Line 39 also, he's mentioned on page 2, and that's it.
thank you.
And then I had another request that on page 5, under public comment on working groups, Mr. Rich Rothstein,
Yeah,
he wanted to be clarified that he was talking about Maine Yankee,
okay.
not Yankee Row. That's all. I'm sorry, that's 18 on page 5. Thank you.
Any other corrections, omissions? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes of the meetings as amended?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. We've got a couple of quick administrative things. I hope they're gonna be quick. First, let me give you a note on the microphones again. The microphones will be live the entire time. There is no way to shut them off. So any of your comments that you don't intend on being recorded and put on YouTube, you may want to defer to another time. The other thing is that if you are speaking and the microphone isn't close enough, please take the time just to slide it over in front of you so that everyone can hear you and you can be recorded. In deference to our guest, Kate O'Connor, who's been kind enough, along with her friend from Entergy, to drive all the way down from Brattleboro and is going back this evening. Senator, I know you wanted to give an update on the legislative stuff, but can we defer it to the next meeting? Okay, so that, I apologize for that, but just in deference to Kate's time.
Short, Sean.
That's okay. The next point I want to mention is that the October meeting, which will be on October 18th, I've now got confirmation that Mr. Bruce Watson, who many of you may know, who's the chief of the reactor decommissioning branch in the division within decommissioning at the NRC, will be joining us. Mr. Watson will be joining us to give us an overview of the NRC's decommissioning. And this really goes back to what we've been talking about from our first meeting, which is, good evening, John, which is to educate ourselves first, to try to get as much information, keeping the focus on the decommissioning first, so that Bruce will be here along with several of his colleagues at the October 18th meeting. As you've probably seen on the agenda, and I know several of you have commented to me individually, the discussion for our November meeting most likely will be focused entirely on the location of the cast, the dry cast storage. Joe Lynch and the folks from Entergy have been good enough tonight to put together a little quick overview of it and a discussion of it, but the next topic after we get through listening to and learning from Mr. Watson will be to really dig in to the dry cast storage issue. And finally, and this may be good news for everybody but Kurt, I will be on vacation on the 18th. I will not be here. So,
I'll entertain a motion to change the date to,
Or location.
yeah, well, I don't know where you're gonna be.
I'll be in London that day.
London.
London. But it's on vacation rather than business, so
Okay.
I'm sure you'll enjoy the experience a lot better than with me. Anyway, you have in front of you, moving on to the next agenda item, a quick update on the working groups. If you don't mind going to that 2 pages of information that you have. One is a landscape printed version with all the names that I had received. How you doing? All the names that I had received to this point. I apologize in advance if I missed somebody's email or if I missed adding something. You'll see that the word tentatively is used across this liberally. I'll walk you through it in a minute, but the first piece of it is, if you would like to be on one, or if I made a mistake or an omission, please just write down your name under the column you want to be on, and I'll update it and get it out to everybody electronically if I miss somebody. Otherwise, the logistics of pulling this off, and Kurt will talk to it a little bit more in a second, but the logistics of pulling this off are not easy for 5 separate meetings. And as was noted in the minutes, we don't want to create, I think, David, you mentioned it, a whole separate bureaucracy of multiple meetings. But what we need to do is get the first one scheduled so we can get that underway. With that in mind, I've spoken at length with the folks here at PCIS. They have another, good evening, Kevin. They have another classroom setup that is very conducive to the size of the meetings we're talking about. Probably with public, no more than probably 20 people, I wouldn't imagine. And these are the available dates for the first meetings. I arbitrarily, and only because it came in the same order of the dates as we had lined up the order of the working groups, I put down a date that we now have the rooms reserved for, starting on October 11th. I would ask that unless there's some real heartburn about these individual dates, that we stick to them for the first meeting, so that those that would like to participate in each of the working groups can get together once, do the discussion about who will chair it, who will do all the administrative stuff and get it going, and then what the first pass may be at the scope of inquiry for each of the groups. So unless there's any real concerns about the dates and the location, it'll be here at PCIS. There's a classroom up in the front of the building that is ideal for it. It's all confirmed. We can, of course, change it. That's why I put tentatively. But I'll open it up for discussion if there's any discussion on these 2 topics to begin with. Hearing none, let me go on to one other topic. Our friends at Entergy requested that they have a position on each one of the working groups, which is fine, as appointed members like anyone else there is. The challenge that they're gonna have, I think, and Michael, you can correct me or Joe, is that sometimes, because they're working up in Vermont and elsewhere, the same person may not be there. As you know, under the statute, the plant, Pilgrim, has designated slots. So they can, as we're doing tonight with Charles, who's representing Pat, they can substitute somebody. So the process, however, is a pain in the neck, and I don't know how else to put it. You gotta write a letter, the designee. So we may get a letter, because if that person wants to vote and participate in the discussions as a voting member, they've gotta be a member of the panel. And in order to be a member of the panel, they've gotta have the letter designating them as a member of the panel under the appointed. So I've gone through this with the folks at Entergy. Everybody's fine on it. And I put it in this way just because I think, at least in the first couple of 3 meetings, there's probably gonna be some variability of who can be assigned based on access. Any concerns, questions on this topic? All right?
And I'll just add, thank you for addressing that. We're not going to have a revolving door of a bunch of different
Yeah.
people. It's really going to be either John Orenberger or Joe Lynch, and we'll designate Joe, who's not on the panel, to appear on my behalf.
Yeah.
And we can do that. It's not that much trouble for us to just send a letter in. We can either do it for each committee meeting or for the committee as a whole, and if we need to do it for each committee meeting, that's no problem at all.
Yeah, the only problem, if you do it as a whole, you don't then reverse it, John will be sitting there, not you at the next
Well,
meeting.
we'll do it for each meeting.
And, you know, we went through the letter, what the letter has to be, and I'd just ask you to send it to Kurt and I electronically at a minimum, so we have a record of it, can note it.
That will be no problem.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
I just have I have a conflict on the 25th. How would you like me to handle that? It's a time conflict. I could do it later.
What I'd ask you to do, without violating the
Yep.
open meeting law,
Yep.
is to get together with Heather and Paul and
Okay.
whoever, and say, can we work this out?
Great, will do. Thank you.
And I'd recommend that to all of you. I mean, we're all starting to get to know each other now, and that's why I would recommend doing it that way. Any other comments on that?
I'd just like to be added to the site cleanup and restoration column, and I'll send you something electronically as well.
All right, Jack, duly noted. Any other comments, questions?
Sean, you can take my name off specifically on safety and security and just leave the PNPS representative for
Okay.
each of them,
Yep,
because it may not be me.
all right.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
So that means any of us can have a designee, but we just need to notify?
I clarified this. The answer is no,
Okay.
but it's also yes. So, as with most things in as with
didn't
most
say he
things
was a
in,
lawyer.
most things in government.
Just like the legislature.
We can go back to how this legislation was created, but you can have a designee, like, for example, I'm the minority leader of the Senate's appointee. In that case, the minority leader would have to do the designating. He would have to do the letter.
Okay.
So by statute, because somebody wrote the statute and put these things in individually, they can do it as an organization,
So the person who actually appointed
the
us
appointing authority.
has to designate the, okay, got it, perfect.
Any other questions?
If I want to be added to some of these committees,
Yes.
just,
You can tell me now, or you can give me a little note, or you can email me. Any of you.
I'll email you because
That's great, Joe. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a comment, it would help if there is somebody interested in the decommissioning, PSDAR and decommissioning, 'cause there's only 3 people there. Would help if somebody was looking to be on another committee.
Good coaching, encouragement. So anybody that would like to let us know about that, that would be very helpful. There's, on the second page of your little handout, the amended rules, the ground rules for it, you'll see it here. I used all my red toner on this. Based on the votes that we took last week, or last meeting rather, to amend this, there's only 2 amendments, and David, I believe you offered both of them, so I just want to make sure I got this right. One is that the scope of each inquiry will have to come back to the panel for us to review and approve it before the working groups go off and run. That's first. And then the second was to delete the minimum requirement of meeting 6 times a year. Anybody remember anything differently than that? I reviewed the minutes twice to make sure I got it right, and those confirmed with my notes, so. Hearing no comments, we'll go on from there. Again, on the logistics and scheduling, and then I'm gonna really pass it over to Kurt on the open meeting law issues. It is clear that these meetings are going to have to be in compliance with the open meeting law, which means a whole bunch of logistics. It means first, you have to have an agenda for the meeting, even the first one. You can leave it open-ended. I've got sort of the standard format, and here's my suggestion on how we logistically handle this. And Kurt and I hadn't had a chance to talk about it because I've been traveling, but I would suggest that I'll handle the first part. So you tell me what the agenda is, or I'll draft one for you. And then I will put it in format, and I will send it to Kurt, and Kurt will work the magic at the state level. I think that, for the moment, is the most reasonable way to do this.
Timing? In advance of 48
Yeah,
hours?
Yeah, we should do it longer than that, only because of postings.
So for our first working meeting on the 11th, when would you need it, by the 4th or something?
By the end of the month. You know, if you can get it by the end of the month of the 4th.
Which is
Oh, yeah.
Saturday?
Yeah.
That ain't gonna happen.
I've been
just let me say
traveling and
that.
I haven't been sleeping.
Yeah, I can feel your pain,
So, yeah, say by the 4th of.
but a week in advance.
Yeah. But is that okay with you, Kurt, to do it?
Yeah, but I think for this initial meeting, we could do a
A standard?
standard, which is
Yeah.
initial meeting to discuss, you've got the language in here.
That's a great
uh,
idea.
I think
Scope,
that would make things
scope,
easy.
So would you like me
Scope
just to
and objectives,
prepare it, and I'll send it out to each
and
group?
meeting schedule, and other items to be determined.
Done.
And that would be the same for all of the
Yeah.
work groups.
I think that
So I think we
makes
do a standard one. for
Yeah, I
this
had to do
first
the
meeting.
same thing to reserve their rooms.
Good.
And Mr. Chair, just so I remember the open meeting laws right, we can't have even email conversations between, the financial committee, between the 6 of us
Yes, you-
without having open meeting, right? There's a
No.
limit of how many people you can email back and forth,
A quorum.
a quorum of the full
You
panel.
may, but to be clear, you may email about logistical issues such as the
Okay.
meeting date and location,
Okay,
but not,
debate about,
a discussion.
and somebody can send an email to push information. You get in trouble when you deliberate, meaning if you receive an email that shocks your conscience, you can't do reply all and say, I'm furious, period.
Okay.
Because that, now all of a sudden there's, so you can send an email, but you can't deliberate, which means there can't be a two-way
Gotcha.
discussion on anything other than logistics.
okay,
Does that,
that's helpful.
does that answer it?
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
And that brings up one other good point, which was not in my notes, but, because I'm gonna keep it to the time. We do receive, fortunately, great input from the public. We all receive them. And what I would ask the public, some of whom are here that do this, we truly appreciate your input, the information you provide, the opinions you provide, the advice and suggestions. Don't be disappointed, though, if we don't reply back. And certainly don't reply back as all, because that's when you get into this mischief with deliberation versus just information. So don't have your feelings hurt if we can't reply to all, and we did get your emails, and we do appreciate it. And with that, I'm gonna ask Kurt to talk about the open meeting law.
I'll be very brief, because pertaining to the subcommittees, the best way to think of it is just think of each subcommittee as its own open body, public body. So if your subcommittee has 5 people, then remember the quorum is 3. And when you, but just going forward, just remember every meeting has to be a public meeting. It has to be a posted meeting. As Sean laid out, Sean and I will work out and handle the posting of every minute, of every meeting. Somebody has to take minutes and maintain those minutes. The minutes have to reflect the attendance. So just think of each subcommittee as its own public body, and we'll be fine.
So where are you posting the?
I'll get to that in a moment. The next agenda item is website now, but are there any particular concerns about open meeting law and subcommittees?
Only the minutes issue, particularly on a small group. What do we have, one talking and the other one taking minutes? You can't have a discussion doing that.
Well, I think that's the reality of working groups and the way we're staffed, that I think we need to look to the committees to take their own minutes. The minutes do not have to be a verbatim recitation. They have to capture the substance in summary form of the discussion.
They don't have to be like Matt's.
They don't have to be like Matt's.
Unless Matt volunteers to attend every meeting.
Well, he's already volunteered Alan
Yeah.
for that job.
So, it's the reality of the staffing. I mean, if people have extra staffing and want to bring somebody to take the minutes for it, that's okay, but on our lean budget, there are not many other options here.
Any other questions?
Yeah, at a minimum on minutes, whenever there are any, say, key issues raised and/or decisions made by the working group, that at a minimum has got to be recorded.
It's got to be reflected, not recorded, but
Well, reflected in
just
the minutes.
reflected
Sure.
in the minutes. And what I can do is, I'd be happy to, hopefully before, I'll do it before October 11th. I'll just work up a quick cheat sheet. I'll ask the general counsel in my office to do just a quick cheat sheet on sort of minimum requirements of the open meeting law as it pertains to your subcommittee meetings, including, at a minimum, what your minutes should look like, so.
Thanks.
Very good, that'll be helpful. Any other comments or questions on this? Kurt, do you mind giving us an update on the website?
Yeah, so I had it fully intended this morning to send you all an email talking about the website, and I'll explain though why I didn't. But thanks to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, we do have a website has been created. It's linked off of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs website. It is live. We were, there's two things I just want to mention, and which is why I didn't get this to you earlier. There is on the web page a contact us button. Public can hit contact the panel, and it'll allow through an email box, it'll allow an email to be sent to the panel. That will actually be monitored. I will monitor that along with EEA and DPU, but I'll be responsible for monitoring that. That went live this morning. So, and now we'll receive emails. The other thing that I'm just trying to work out is that I went to send you all the email address and realized that the link was rather long. It went, EEA/DPU/waste management/ so I've sent an email back to the person at EEA who designed the website just to ask if they could shorten that, so it was something just like EEA/NDCAP. I'm sure we'll be able to do that. It'll take another day or so. That shouldn't be. And then I'll send everybody the link. What you'll see is, a few boxes. There's a box for all of the full panel meetings. There's a box for all of the subcommittee meetings, and there's a box for resources. Resources is a place where information that the panel elects to post, the panel can do that. We need to set up an administrative procedure to have an approval process so that we're only posting things there that the panel thinks are credible and worthy of posting there. So I want to be a little bit careful. It's not just an information dump. The public can't put things there. This is for us to post things there. Going forward, from now on, that will be the website where we will officially post notices of meetings. So once I work out the last logistics, I will formally notify the Attorney General's office that this is the website for our postings, rather than it's been on the DPU website. So that's, the formal postings will be there, and then you'll see on the right side, their upcoming meetings will be prominent. The next meeting of the panel, the next meeting of each working group will be right there. So we'll get that out. We'll make sure it'll get into the minutes, so it'll get to the public as well. And within, I hope, just the next couple of days, you'll get an email from me with the link and et cetera.
Great work getting it up so quickly. Any questions on the website so far? And I think this is going to be a work in progress as we move forward, but great job getting it up with limited resources.
Yeah, thank you, and to EEA too.
Absolutely. All right, hearing no more on that, Joe Lynch has been kind enough to put together 2 quick presentations for us, and Joe, I'd ask you to try to keep it to no more than about 10 minutes between the two of them if possible. I know that you can be very concise. The first topic is the establishment of a special working group on the cask locations and storage, and the second is the proposed site tour. Both, I gotta tell you, from my perspective, and I'll make more comments at the end, Folks have been very, very responsive to what we talked about at the last meeting and come forward very quickly. Great working so far, so Joe, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chairman Mullen, and good evening, everyone. Given the strong interest in dry fuel storage, not only here, but, across our industry, I wanted to give you a little background first of where we stand at Pilgrim Station with our dry fuel storage project. And move up a couple slides, please. Thank you. So currently, Pilgrim Station has one operational ISFSI, Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation pad. It has a design capacity of 40 casks, but administratively, we limit that to 38 because it allows us to shuffle the casks around if we need to get to one in the back row, that kind of thing. You need to have the additional capacity. So right now, we have the capacity for 38. The current pad that's operational has 8 loaded Holtec System 100 multi-purpose canisters. That's the long name of the designer that we chose to have our casks manufactured and our fuel stored in. Each one of those casks holds 68 fuel assemblies, so we have 544 fuel assemblies stored currently on that first pad. In order for us to move all of the fuel, we have roughly 3,000 left in the spent fuel pool and about 590 in the current operating reactor. We will need a second pad to accomplish this. We also have plans next year in 2018 to do the next campaign. We haven't made that determination yet, but we will be moving additional fuel in 2018 into casks. They will be the same system that we're using right now. As far as the second pad, right now, we would still have to go through a design engineering and actually a vendor selection, even though Holtec is who we're using right now. Obviously, economics is a very important part of our decision-making, so we'll likely go out to bid for whomever will be supplying casks into the future. So given the uncertainty of who it would be and which system we're going to use, we don't have the exact size of the pad. I think it's safe to say it'll be slightly smaller than the one we have right now. And we don't have the total number of casks. If it was the Holtec system, we could make an estimate, but that really isn't important at this point, just that we're in the very early stages of that planning. Next slide, please. So the effort to site the second pad is obviously a very, very important project to the overall decommissioning planning effort. It's being headed up by our decommissioning planning organization under the direction of John Warrenberger, one of the panel members. And we're in the very early stages of looking into this, given that our real focus right now is operating the plant safely. But I wanted the panel to know that going into the decision are a lot of inputs that we have to take into account. We did a siting study for the existing pad. We'll have to go through the same effort for the second pad, but it'll look at physical and engineering design considerations. That includes the soil under it, where it's located. It'll have security requirements. The NRC has very rigorous requirements that this whole system has to be stored within our security owner-controlled area so it can be monitored 24/7 into the future for however long we'll have fuel on site. It has to meet NRC regulations, and we have to get their approval for the design and for the vendor that we'll be using. There will be permitting, both local for it, as well as any other permitting that is necessary, very similar to the first pad. Certainly, there will be environmental considerations. A lot of comments were brought forth by this panel and have been written about the location of the pad. All of that will be evaluated as it has been for the first pad. And very importantly, it will have to be looked at in regards to its impact on decommissioning. So we can't locate the pad in such a way where it's so close to the buildings that have to be taken down as part of decommissioning. So there's offsets and there's considerations that have to be factored into the overall decommissioning plan. We propose to provide, an update at a future meeting. It's proposed potentially for the November meeting. So I think that's a good start to get some of the questions that I've been collecting, some of the questions that have been put out there regarding that. And I think having that background will give the panel some education, and we'll decide whether or not it makes sense to do this as part of a separate working group or maybe integrate it with some of the ones that are already existing. The one on the PSDR and decommissioning, safety and security elements would be touching both of those. So at this point, I would recommend that we have the opportunity to present more about this at a future meeting, whether it's November or sometime into the future. Collect some of the questions, and that would be factored into, some of the things that we're looking at and some of the things that we're required to do by either regulation or the design process. And then make a decision at that point, how much more discussion and how we'll collect that information into our overall decision-making.
And then, yeah, I was gonna ask you to go on to the tour.
Yeah, I can continue on or take questions,
No.
whichever, continue right on.
Yeah, I would continue at the moment.
Okay,
Do you
next
have one
slide, please.
question, Joe? I just don't wanna
When
get,
you get to the point of the permitting process, particularly locally, will it be part of a public meeting? Will it be sort of open discussion? As you well know, there were lots of issues raised in the past, be it legitimate or not, relative to the first pad and litigation and so forth and so on, which was resolved. But I would think it would be helpful that if in at least the local permitting process, there was some opportunity for public discussion, or at least open discussion on the kinds of things that you've taken into account that you had to with the NRC and so forth and so on, just so that the public and everybody is at least knowledgeable of the background process that was used in order to go after the permit.
Yeah, I'll take that as input into the overall decision-making, but we'll follow the town's process for both seeking a zoning and a building permit. And whatever the town requirements are, we'll obviously meet those. So I think that's
So-
probably the best way to approach it.
before we go on to the site tour, if there's any comments on putting this on the agenda as the primary focus for November, that's what I'd like to hear at the moment. It just seems to me that there's a true appreciation on everybody's part that we want to talk about this. We want to get a better understanding as quickly as possible and get in front and synchronize it with your planning process. So is there any comment on that? Is there any concerns about putting it on the November meeting? Okay, please go on.
A question. John Mahoney, because the town will have to be the one that issues a local permit, I assume that since, as a member of the panel, even informally, you'll be having some discussions with the other selectmen prior to that.
Sure, but the permit doesn't come from the Board of Selectmen. But I'm sure we'll weigh in with our opinion and talk about it, but they've already gone through a lengthy process with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and obviously there was litigation on both sides, but I'm sure you'll probably see something similar this time around.
Okay, with that,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, Senator.
who is going to be preparing and presenting on November, in the November meeting?
I assume it'll be you, Joe?
Yeah, it'll be either myself or likely some of the folks that are involved with the process of going forward with the design, but it'll be at least me, and, I'll have a lot of help.
And Senator, I see it as the beginning of the process. I don't see it as sort of the conclusive meeting. And you may not have seen it because of the heads anyway, but the last slide, basically, the last bullet, is Entergy's intention to really dig into this with this panel, right?
Right, and what's the best way to collect questions, the best way to address people's concerns? I think first would be to make a presentation that gives a very detailed overview of how we would go through the process, so you understand the constraints that we have for where we're gonna locate this, and then, field any questions that might be important for us to consider as we finalize that second pad design. In essence, this is the second one, so it'll be very similar to the first one in regards to all of the design requirements. The location, certainly will be driven by a lot of these things that I've mentioned, but we also understand the public outreach.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I'm especially sensitive to it only because I've run a business in Puerto Rico now for the last 20 years. And I will tell you that never did it occur to me that 2 Category 4 or 5 hurricanes would do what they did down there. The other thing I will say is that the damage to the infrastructure relative to this project that we're talking about was not anything anybody could have anticipated. And I'm not equating the two, but what I am saying is I do think it's important that during this presentation, and we can ask this in the November meeting if that's more appropriate, I really want to see the meteorological and climatological assumptions that are going into the locating of these. Because that is a real concern I have. If we only do that looking back, I'm concerned about the conversation. So.
You've just lived it, so I don't think there's gonna be any question that that will be one of the considerations as part of it. I think what we wanna make sure is that we get all the information we possibly can, and if we create a separate working group just on this topic, then that's what we do. Any other concerns yet? Okay, Joe?
I just had one thing, Joe, you mentioned that you may possibly go to somebody else other than Holtec. I guess, you know, it would be of interest certainly to understand who that is and what the range of variabilities are,
Sure.
you know, so.
Yeah, at this point, it would be too early to tell, but
Right.
obviously, it would be those who have approved NRC designs.
How
There's
different can
not-
it be? kind of
Yeah,
thing?
there's not a lot of them out there, so, you know, I can give you the list right now, but it's not like shopping for a car. You know, it's a very specialized technique and design criteria that goes into these things, so.
Okay. Any other comments before we move on? On to the site tour. Joe.
Very good. So a number of members of this panel who may not have had an opportunity to tour the Pilgrim Station in the past, we want to provide that opportunity. And certainly for anyone who hasn't been there in a while and would like to have the opportunity to see us firsthand, we'd like to welcome you. What we'll do is we'll propose a number of potential dates, likely late October, early November. I took a look very quickly at the site calendar, and it's quite busy for approximately the next month or so, but then we'll offer some opportunities for folks to come in. In order for us to meet our security requirements and to get you through the site efficiently, it'll be a number of small groups, likely 5 people. That happens to align with the number of people an escort can bring into the plant. So we may go with multiple, but it also makes for a better tour when we have a more intimate group, so we can talk about the issues, answer questions, things like that. I mentioned the fact that we have you to fill out a security form or a visitor access form, and it will require your social security number. And that's a sensitive topic for some people, but it's an absolute requirement, because before anybody is allowed into the site, even for a tour, even for an hour, we perform a background check, and it's the social security number that triggers that. So I wanted to be right up front, because sometimes we get surprised when we send the forms out and people say, I'm not giving you the social security number. We absolutely understand that, but we can't invite you into the site without it. So that's one of our requirements. Next slide, please. Visitors just need to be physically able to walk around the site. I know that's kind of obvious, but it is an industrial site. You know, we have requirements on footwear and things like that. 1, to make you safe, and 2, to make you comfortable. So we'll outline those things. We actually have a part of the visitor form gives some of the prerequisites for anybody that goes through the site, no high heels, things like that. Because you will be going through equipment that is trying to sense any potential contamination that you may have picked up while on site, although we don't expect it. It also will pick up things like nuclear medicine, so we ask in advance to disclose that. Again, a topic that most of the time is not a concern, but we want to be right up front with people. What I'll do is I'll forward an invitation to the co-chairs so they can send it out to the panel members. Once you've had a chance to take a look at the dates to see whether they work for you, you can reply back to them, or if it's easier, you can reply directly back to me. The next slide is my contact information, and I can certainly provide all of that in the email. It's a great opportunity to come in and take a look at the site. You'll have a chance to see the dry fuel storage pad as it stands right now, some of the ongoing activities at the site, and we hope you'll take us up on that invitation.
Can you provide us, Kurt and I, with a PDF version of this, and we'll just distribute the 2 things to our...
Absolutely, we'll send that to you. Yep.
Any comments on the site visit?
Just say, by keeping it to five or less, it will also allow us to avoid any open meeting law issues. 5 people or less can not only do the tour, but they can talk amongst each other and share ideas, because it'll be less than a quorum. If we start getting much bigger, we're gonna have a problem.
Might have been one of the criteria I considered.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Point, Kurt? With that, I just want to make one quick comment and then add one on that I hadn't planned. First is that I've obviously had a chance to speak with Joe since our last meeting, and I gotta tell you that I've been very impressed with both the openness and responsiveness about the issues that we've raised as concerns so far. So the tone is right, the content's right, the substantial parts of the conversation feel good, so thanks to you guys for handling it this way. We look forward to continuing with that. The second thing is, much to my anal retentive dismay, we're running 10 minutes late. And it was necessary, but Kate, they drove down for 3 hours to get here, so I'm very sensitive to that. So what I'd like to do is go right to Kate at this point. Kate O'Connor is the chair of the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. Might sound familiar. Charter is very similar. Appointed by the governor, just recently reappointed, right? For another
No,
term?
I have
Are
another
you-
year before I have to get reappointed.
Oh.
So I could get booted in a year.
Well, what we were talking about earlier is that.
You're welcome here.
Kate, you really are. Kate, her meeting is tomorrow evening, meeting. And it was particularly nice that she came down tonight and is going back the same day. But I offered her the video of this, saying she could just tell the members she did her meeting last night. It was just a different place, but she declined that. She's also the chairwoman of the Brattleboro Select Board. And in addition to that, Kevin, as you know, she is the executive director of the Brattleboro Area Chamber of Commerce. So in addition to being able to give us unusually unique insights into the experience that she's had in the panel and Vermont's had, and how they've been working with Entergy and what we should learn from it, she's also got a very holistic view that will help everybody from my selectmen to our executive chamber of commerce and many other folks at the table. So with that, Kate, thank you very much on behalf of all of us for coming down, and appreciate the 6 hours plus of driving you've done for us today.
No, I appreciate you folks letting me come down here. One of the things that Vermont, we started from scratch, so we're so happy to help people maybe not start from scratch. And before I start, for any of you around the table who has no background in decommissioning or nuclear power, I didn't either. My prior background, I worked in Vermont state government, had nothing to do with decommissioning of Vermont Yankee whatsoever. I also, I don't know if I want to admit this, but I was a political operative for a while. So I started knowing nothing. 4 years later, I don't want to say I'm an expert, but I learned a lot. So I think you folks are gonna, over time, you're gonna know more than you ever think that you could know. And I also want to acknowledge that Mike Toomey was an original member of the Vermont panel, so he just keeps on going. And Joe Lynch is he's been making presentations to our panel since September 2014 as well. So we're sort of in this little group that you're all going to get to know each other. I'll just give you, what I want to do is give you a brief history of what our panel is, really brief, since you folks pretty much do what we do. Plus, I want to tell you where we were when we first started and where we are now. And then I really just want to open it up to questions, because I don't want to talk about things that aren't helpful to you. Our first meeting was back in September of 2014. The legislature formed us in April of 2014 when Entergy announced it was going to close VY. So we all got together for the first time in September of 2014, and it was in December of 2014 that VY went offline. And before I start, if Mike hears me say something wrong, you can interrupt.
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, it's okay. So when we started, the plan, Entergy's plan for VY was to put it in safe store, and it would sit in sort of mothballed until 2067, where they would start decommissioning the plant, and it would probably be done in 2072. So we operated with that fact in mind for 2 years, and we were spending our time learning about decommissioning, learning about what safe store was, learning about cask, because they were gonna, obviously they're moving to spent fuel. So we spent 2 years going through what it all meant. Then fast forward December, or actually November 8th, I'll never forget it because it was election day, November 8th, 2016, Entergy announced that it intended to sell VY to North Star, which is a company out of New York. So effectively, they're transferring the license. So obviously, that changed what the panel and the entire state of Vermont was looking at, because we weren't dealing with a mothballing a plant for 50 years. We were dealing with a accelerated decommissioning. And in Vermont, the State of Vermont, the Public Utility Commission has to approve the license transfer or the sale, and the NRC does as well. And that's what's happening right now. So we started thinking one thing, and now we've shifted to another. And what we've been doing lately as a panel is talking about or learning about the proceedings that have to go on in the state level and the proceedings that are going down at the NRC. You know, we can get into our various opinions about that, you know, what people think in Vermont about the sale and the accelerated decommissioning, if you want to get into that. But we've sort of put the actual decommissioning, how you decommission a plant, has now been on the, you know, put on the back burner, because we're into figuring out whether the plant's going to be sold. And we'll start that again, obviously, if North Star, the sale goes through, and if it goes through, they want the closing at the end of 2018. Then, of course, we'll start a process all over again, having North Star sort of talk to us about in more detail what their plans are. So we're in this, you know, we've heard Entergy's plans, now we're dealing with the sale, and then we'll go and most likely talk to North Star about the details of what they're doing. One of the things that's been really important to us as a panel, and when we started, we really didn't know what we're doing. And we had our first meeting, and Mike is here, and he was there. There was this, why are we here, what are we doing? We had no one to model ourselves after, so we really were sitting there, 19 people, looking at each other, what are we supposed to do? And Entergy was making presentations about things that, to be quite honest with you, I had no idea what they were talking about. That's why I give you folks kudos for starting early and sort of getting educated about some of these issues. One of the things that we were faced with in December of 2014 was when Entergy filed their PSDAR, and everybody kept saying PSDAR, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. But it's the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. And at the time, to be honest with you, I didn't know how important it was. So I think it's really smart that you folks are gonna be talking about it in a working group, because it's actually really important. So whoever that fourth person is should get on that working group, because you don't realize how important the PSDAR is. So, we sort of fumbled around for literally 4 months, and then in January of 2015, I think we got it together. So I really encourage you folks, to learn as much as you can now, because it's gonna come at you quite quickly. One of the things that's been really important to us as a panel is to make sure that our primary focus and primary mission coming out of every single meeting we do is making sure that the public is educated about what is going on. We have had times where we've taken we've written advisory opinions, and we've come out with we're for this or we're not for that. But those became contentious at times, and I'm not saying don't do them, because actually, sometimes when things are contentious is when you learn the most. But we've really had a mission of, you gotta make sure that the public knows what's going on, and this is the forum. Our forum is really where that happens. So I would encourage you to, keep that in mind, because ultimately, people on the street, they don't have access to the information and the people that you folks will have. I have this giant list of things that are gonna frustrate the heck out of you folks, and I can share them now, or I can share them later. Because it will get frustrating. There are things that you're gonna want to have a say in that, quite frankly, you're not gonna be able to. And we learned that sometimes the hard way, because we tried to have a say. And the state of Vermont, as a state government, was very aggressive in trying to, if there was an issue such as the use of the Decommissioning Trust Fund for spent fuel management, they went to the NRC and said, you shouldn't be able to use it for that. And of course, we're basically, anytime the state asked the NRC something, we were rebuffed. So that's really frustrating, but, and there could be people from Entergy here that aren't gonna like what I have to say, but that doesn't mean you don't try. Because sometimes that's how you get your voice out. So whether it's the state of Massachusetts, and the state of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and Vermont have worked together on some of these issues. But that's a way that you're able to have a voice of what you want to say, and you also get the information out. On my really frustrating list, things, the PSDAR, you're going to want to comment on it. The NRC isn't going to listen because they don't have to approve it, but that doesn't mean don't comment on it, because you get your voice out. And I don't like to say things, put words in Entergy's mouth, but one of the things is that there are things that you're going to want either Entergy to do or the NRC to do, but quite frankly, there's no rules that they're going to have to do it. And that was another frustration for us for a while. But that doesn't mean you don't ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get the information out. I have this big list. I don't want to read them all because I don't want to be a downer. No, I want you to stay alive, but I think my main message would be, don't get discouraged. And if you have a question, ask it. And if you want the state of Massachusetts to ask a question for you, or to file a petition to intervene or for a hearing, have them do it, even though you might look to Vermont and say, well, it didn't work there. Do it anyway, because it's a productive and helpful thing, I think, to do. And again, it's been extremely frustrating. Some of the issues, and I would highlight, I know some of you have done it because I've heard you say it to me, is look at what's going on in Vermont. And I can't speak for Entergy and I can't speak for North Star, but if I have no insider information, but based on public statements by both companies, the plan for the future probably involves Entergy selling Pilgrim, whether it's to North Star or another entity. So if you follow what's going on in Vermont now, I think you'll find that that's the future that it holds for you folks. And obviously, what's happening in Vermont now sets precedent. So I think it's if you look at what's happening to us, most likely, Entergy may file a PSDAR that says they're going to put the plant in safe store. But I think you should be prepared for an accelerated decommissioning. North Star has formed a company with Areva to do just this, decommission nuclear power plants. So you might be talking now, thinking it's going to be 50 years after the plant closes that the decommissioning will start. I think you folks should plan that, it'll be not long after the plant closes that the decommissioning will start. I think if you approach it that way, you'll find you're working on what you really need to be talking about. Two of the issues that I would offer that you should keep in mind in that regards, that if the plant is sold, and what we're really talking about in Vermont is whether there's enough money to decommission the plant and whether there's actually enough information where characterizing the site. Is there enough information to really know what's in that site, which obviously impacts how much money you need to decommission it. North Star is telling us now that it's going to cost probably less than 600, Entergy can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's less than $600 million to decommission the site, which is almost what's in the site, the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund, so their numbers are equal. Entergy told us if they started 50 years from now, it would be $1.24 billion. So it's sort of hard for us to wrap around, how can you go from 1.2 billion to 600 million? We can't get the detailed financial information from North Star, which is very frustrating for all of us.
Is that because it's the secret sauce?
That's the secret sauce, yes. That's what North Star has done is taken all the tasks that, or individual jobs that go into decommissioning a plant, and they say they have 900 of them. And they've put dollar figures, attributed a dollar figure to each task. And the Public Utility Commission, it used to be called the Public Service Board, the Public Utility Commission is able to see those dollar figures, but they're the only ones that can. Because North Star is saying if we show how we're doing it, basically somebody could undercut them. Another company could come in and say, well,
Yeah, if I may,
Yeah.
Sean, may I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
To what extent is the Utility Commission therefore depending upon your input? Because it's the NRC and the Utility Commission that
Yeah.
make the decisions.
yeah, that's right, and that's what it is. Both the NRC and the Public Utility Commission take public input. How much they listen to us is another story. And we do have the Commissioner of the Public Service Department on our board. And she's very receptive to listening to what we have to say, because the Public Service Board, or Department is the advocates for the public through the process. We have submitted written comments as different individuals or subsets of our panel to both the NRC and the Public Utility Commission. We hope we have some kind of impact, but, we don't know. It's
But
very clear.
who has the liability?
For-
If you let North Star Ariba
Mm-hmm.
assume the decommissioning for 600 million versus the safe store number of 1.2 or whatever.
Yep.
Who's going to assume that liability since the remaining in the trust fund is exactly what they bid?
Yep. That's where it's frustrating. We are told, and we just had the NRC came up in May to do a public meeting on, North Star has filed another post-shutdown decommissioning activities report based on their timeline and their figures. And Mike has been involved in those meetings too. The answer to that question is who owns the plant, the licensee. And that's the answer we keep getting, the licensee. And we asked the NRC that exact same question. If North Star runs out of money, because there's no money in the decommissioning trust fund, and obviously there's no way to replenish the decommissioning trust fund because that money came from ratepayers, and that's a merchant plant now and it's offline, so there's no money going into the fund except what is invested like in the stock market.
I would assume, though, they would take that, if they take the 600 million, they started the decommissioning, and they found that it was going to cost them more
They-
per line item, then they would get to a position where they would say, okay, the rest is safe store.
Well, that's,
If I could just interrupt for a second. I'd like you to get through what
Sorry.
you wanted, no,
Yeah.
but I want to try to have at least a half an hour for everybody to have question and answers, but I don't want to interrupt good interaction either. So that's, but I just want to make sure you cover all the points,
Yeah.
and then we can go back and dig into
yeah,
it.
well, I think.
And give the public a little time to
Yeah.
ask questions.
I mean, I
as
guess,
well.
and this is bringing up where the things that we're frustrated, so I can tell you, you're gonna be frustrated, you're gonna be equally frustrated. But I guess my overall message, once again, is what, this forum is a perfect forum to get the information out. People, and I can tell you, people in Vermont rely upon our panel to get the information out. We have discussions. We're, like you folks, we're a diverse group of people. We sometimes disagree, but in disagreements is where you sort of, you hear a lot and you learn a lot when people are disagreeing with each other. So I would just, when you're thinking about what's important that you do, that's what we do. We keep that in mind on everything that we do, is that getting the information out to the public is the number one thing. And with that, you have a good discussion and you learn what's going on.
Covered
so-
everything you want to?
I guess so, yeah. I was getting all excited about our conversation.
Yep, please. Now's a good time. Jump in.
So, Kate, it's important to share with us those frustration points, because we're just forming our working groups, and I think it'd be important to, for your experience, so we could sort and bin those into our working groups to
Yeah.
at least get them addressed and
Sure.
make us aware of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that, there's a number of one, and I said one of them was the PSDAR. It's going to be a huge document that you're going to get. I don't know if anybody's looked at the one from Vermont, the one that Entergy filed, and there's been a subsequent one. It's a really long document, but it's a really important document because the key to it is it outlines the timeline and the money that's involved in decommissioning the plant. And there are lots of other things in it. One of the things that we learned, it took us a couple of months to actually occur to us that, they file Entergy, and now North Star in Vermont has filed the PSDAR with the NRC. The NRC doesn't have to approve the document. It's filed, they check it off, we got it, which is really actually frustrating because I remember the state of Vermont, several of the state agencies and departments, and I think maybe the Attorney General's office had a whole list of questions, like, I don't know, it was like 300 questions or something that they posed to Entergy about the PSDAR. They didn't have to answer the questions. It didn't matter if they answered them or not because, they checked the box with the NRC on filing the PSDAR. So that's a really frustrating thing because you're going to see things in it that you say, I don't want, that doesn't make sense. But there's no approval process. Yeah.
Has Vermont, have any of the agencies in the state, or has the panel asked for consultants or other experts? If you're asking questions to Entergy that Entergy doesn't want to answer, obviously there are
Yeah.
qualified experts that can answer them.
Yes.
So I guess, to what degree has the state extended resources to assist you by providing experts? Some of that might cost money.
Right. At this point, we go around the whole money thing. We've gone through this. At this point, we've been able to get people to come and talk to us that we haven't had to pay any money to. And a lot of that is we've used the resources within state government. We have people that know about environmental conservation or, radiological hazardous waste. So at this point, we've been really, really lucky. We have some people coming up tomorrow night to talk to us about rubblization, because that's one of the things that North Star is proposing to do on the site. And, we got them through a chain of people, but they're coming up at no cost to us. But the Department of Public Service is what our board is under, and they are supposed to provide resources if we need them. They haven't said no yet, but we really haven't had to ask. But it's a really good question, because you don't want to just rely upon the people.
Well,
Putting
Mr.
the
Chairman, if I
application
could
in.
follow up relative to our task
Yeah,
here.
absolutely.
And the thought, you don't always get what you pay for, but sometimes you do. And if there's going to be a really technical support, that a lot of money was paid with a special interest to create, hate to be that blunt, but that's the reality with the PSDAR. There's a special interest involved, which is to do it at the least cost. Then there needs to be resources expended by someone who doesn't have that special interest to review that, to make sure that its interests are the same as our interests.
Yeah.
And I guess in Vermont, have you decided on a process to do that?
Well, the thing is, and this is where the frustration comes in, we can get 100 experts to come in and look at the PSDAR and tell us this is wrong with it. It doesn't matter, because all the Entergy or North Star or whomever, whomever Exelon, whoever owns a plant, all they have to do is send the PSDAR to the NRC. The NRC doesn't, they look at it and say, is all the information that we're supposed to have here. They make no judgments on the information. There's no approval process for that information. There is right now, on the federal level, the NRC is going through a process to actually put together rules on how plants are decommissioned, because there really are very few rules on how you decommission a nuclear power plant. So they're going through a process, and in 2019, they're going to have the rules written. And Vermont has been very active in saying, from a state's perspective, here's what we think is important when the NRC is writing these rules. One of them, as we've said, is that the NRC there should be a formal approval process on the PSDAR, that's really, really important. And the other side, the industry, nuclear industry doesn't want an approval process for the PSDAR. And I think, and I don't know if I'm wrong about this, I think the staff at the NRC is recommending to the commissioners that there doesn't have to be an approval process for the PSDAR. And I think that's true. I can't remember. So that's what's going to be really frustrating. You can bring in 100 experts to look at this thing. It isn't going to matter. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't bring in the experts to look at it, because the document itself provides a lot of information on how the plant is going to be decommissioned. That's the roadmap. So that's why this working group on the PSDAR, I think, is extremely important, because it's going to tell you a lot.
Joe, did you have a question?
Kate, you had mentioned earlier the value you thought of keeping the public informed and so forth of the whole process of the panel, and that a number of your recommendations were ignored by the powers to be, including the state. What impact have you experienced from the public as you've tried to keep them informed of the process and your recommendations? And when the recommendations have been ignored or rejected or what have you, as that becomes then information available to the public, do you get any kind of reaction from the public?
Yeah. And first, the state hasn't rebuffed anything yet. The state has actually been the driving force, taking issues down to the NRC and saying, hey, we don't think that the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Funds should be used for spent fuel management. So actually, the state of Vermont has been really on top of this, sort of questioning the NRC's process along the way. So I think the public, they're as frustrated sometimes as the panel is, but I think they appreciate the ability to ask these questions and to hear the responses. And I know there are times, and Joe comes to all of our meetings, and sometimes he says things that the public doesn't like, but it gives. We have a very active community in Vermont, and they, I think, appreciate the opportunity to come to panel meetings. They appreciate the opportunity to ask experts questions when they come here. They were able to ask questions to the NRC and express their comments to the NRC. They've been able to ask questions of Mike. They've been able to ask questions of Scott State from North Star. But there is that frustration when you realize, we can sit here and we can say all this stuff and we can say this is what we want, but we're not going to get it. But I think we're all sort of in it together, realizing we'd rather everybody know what's happening. We might not get what we want, but sometimes I think there's value in knowing you're not going to get something, because it shines a light on the system, so to speak. And that's why Vermont has been very active in the rulemaking process with the NRC, because all of a sudden we realized, wait a second, there really are no rules, because what Entergy does, or not just Entergy, but anybody, a licensee for a plant, they apply for an exemption or a license amendment. So you ask the NRC, well, can we do this as opposed to that? And most of the time they say yes.
So regardless of the outcome, if you will, the inclusiveness or level of inclusiveness in the process is valuable.
It's very valuable. And I think, when I started, I have no background in this whatsoever. I went down and testified at an NRC meeting to the commissioners on public participation in the decommissioning process. And I never, I wouldn't, if somebody had asked me to do that 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't know, what do you mean? But, it's very, very valuable, because you realize the frustrations. And I have hope, I'm probably a dreamer, that if enough of us understand what the process is, we may be able to make changes. And it's sort of scary that the NRC's rulemaking is supposedly going to be done in 2019, because to me, I wish we had more time to actually have an impact on that, even though we've been really trying hard. But that's why I think it's really important. That's why this is really valuable, because the light goes on. The light will go on many, many times for all of you when you realize, I can't do anything about that. That's not right.
Ryan, did you have a question?
Yeah, going back to the PSDAR, I'm curious about the validity of North Star, which hasn't bought it yet, filing a revision. and what that sort of status is. So, you know, is there a rule that says, hey, Entergy or whomever can revise it at will? And, you know, so which one then, does the old one go away when there's a revision?
Yeah, part of the
I
license.
haven't seen the new one, so.
Yeah, and it's shorter. Part of the license transfer process is they have to file the new PSDAR.
So they have to.
Yeah, and because their timeline and their financials have changed, you know, how much they think it's gonna cost. If
And
this,
who's doing it has changed.
yes, and because, you know, it won't be.
Even though it hasn't, they haven't sold anything yet.
That's right, and it's part of the NRC's process, because NRC has not given the green light to the sale, to the license transfer yet. And if the license transfer and sale doesn't go through, Entergy has the
Back to the other one.
PSDAR, yeah.
Yes, Rich.
Thank you. In terms of the PSDAR as well, let's assume that North Star gets approval, and they start the decommissioning process, and they have $600 million to do that. And they have a milestone chart that leads them to the end of that decommissioning process. How do you expect they'll bill that money? Directly to the government, and the government will pay them on the basis of what?
They actually,
the whole fund.
the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund goes with the plant. The government doesn't,
Pardon me, I didn't understand that.
yeah, yeah.
So they'll bill themselves?
Yeah, it's their pot of money.
So
yeah.
will there be any checks and balances
Well,
on that payment
there's-
process?
Well, that's sort of a bone of contention.
Good question.
Yeah, the answer is they say yes, the state doesn't necessarily agree. When there are expenditures made from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund, Entergy, it's Entergy now in Vermont, has to file paperwork saying within the next 30 days, we might or will take, you know, $4.5 million out of the Decommissioning Trust Fund. They don't have to explicitly say why, you know, they can say for decommissioning activities or whatever. But we don't get the, you know, they're gonna use $1 million on this, $50 on this, you know, whatever. There was a time when Entergy in Vermont did not wanna have to disclose that they were gonna make the withdrawals from the fund, but the state of Vermont was saying to the NRC, that's not right, and then Entergy pulled back and said, no, we'll let everybody know. So there's very little that, on a state level, that you know about where the
So
money's
who would be
concerned.
held, let's say somebody would be held responsible at the state level if they get to that 600 million point, and they really haven't completed enough of the
Right,
decommissioning.
right.
Who's going to be the person to speak to, stand up to?
It's actually the NRC,
Uh-huh.
yeah. It's the NRC that oversees the whole thing, and that's
you.
why, but they, you know, keep telling us it's the licensee that's ultimately responsible, and you say, well, what does that mean? So, that's a question we've gone round and round about.
Any questions? Yes, Paul.
Kate, did you gain much value from studying the main Yankee decommissioning, or the Yankee Row decommissioning, or the Connecticut Yankee? I mean, this is not the first power plant, nuclear power plant that's been decommissioned. And
Right.
in the various states, the greenfield, that's all been explored before.
Yeah, we actually had someone from Mass DEP who was involved in the road decommissioning come to our meeting. It was actually last October. This was prior to us knowing that the sale was gonna happen. So it actually sort of worked out really well, because he came and talked to us about, you know, the environmental issues with the decommissioning. And he gave us a lot of really good insight about how state and federal agencies can work together on this, so you're not, because sometimes that doesn't happen. We also, some of our panel members took a trip down to Connecticut Yankee to see what it looks like when something is all cleaned up. So we've, you know, you can learn from what's already happened, and we've tried to do that too.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Kate, thank you for coming down. You talked a lot about the importance of communication and some of the frustrations. What are, if you had to pick like the top 3 areas where you think the panelists had the greatest impact, what would you say that those areas of focus have been?
I think part of it is, and maybe this is a function of Vermont state government itself, the agency and department heads, or even the Attorney General's office in the state of Vermont, has listened to some of the concerns, not just of the panel, but of the public. And a lot of what they've been sort of advocating for are the things that we've been advocating for. So that's been a really, really positive experience for us. And, you know, we've gone from one administration to another, and they didn't necessarily, you know, they're not the same political party, they didn't share sometimes the same ideals about what's going on, but they've both been really, really supportive. And I think that's been really helpful for us, and we've made an impact there. I think especially the citizen members, there are 6 of us on the panel, and it's hard for 19 people to come to a consensus on something, especially you have so many different interests, that the 6 citizen members have really worked together for advocating on behalf of the citizens. And we've written letters, you know, to the NRC, to the Public Service Board, Public Utility Commission. And you might say, well, you just sent a letter, but we're trying to speak on behalf of our group, or in the 6 of us, and for the public. And I think that, you know, we feel like it's giving a voice to people that don't necessarily have the voice in the process, which is the public. So I feel, and I've actually, when we go back to, if we learn from other plants, I've been in touch with the chair of Maine, I think, Yankee Row, and in Connecticut, and we've done things jointly together, you know, as chairs of a panel, in addition to the state of Vermont and the other states working together. So, you know, you might just say, oh, they sent a letter, or they did this or that thing, but I think it gives voice to things that people don't, you know, if you don't go down to the NRC and say, public participation is important, here's why, then you have Vermont state government saying, yes, public participation is important, here's why, you know, you might not get a win in everything, but you get it out there.
Yes, Kevin?
Not a question, just a comment. Kate, you've been very generous with your time. I just want to thank you. It's not the first time that you've been here to Plymouth. You met with the town's working group, and you were very generous with your time when John and Jessica and I and some other folks from town came up. And I just want everybody to understand that we've been talking to you for probably over a year now, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I was actually here the day that Entergy announced it was closing.
That's right. I remember that.
You were the carrier.
I know, it was.
Senator, did you have another question?
Kate, I testified at the same hearing at the NRC.
That's right.
So I share your skepticism relative to the NPRM process. My question would be this: unfettered by budgetary constraints, what do you think your commission would do relative to understanding, analyzing, and commenting on? So forget the fact that you don't have the money to hire
Right.
people. If that wasn't a constraint,
Yep.
what do you think your panel would do relative to the post-shutdown
Yeah.
activity report?
Over the PSDAR?
Yes.
Well, we would actually hire, if we could have all the money in the world,
Yep.
we would hire experts, especially on the environmental implications of the decommissioning. Because when you read the report, it's, some of it, you know, what do we know if you're a layperson? But that's what we would do. I mean, if we could have whatever we wanted, and we would not just hire experts for that, we'd hire experts for other things. You know, part of it now is the whole financial, all the financial issues that a lot of us just don't, you know, understand. Now it's very basic. When you sort of move it all down, it's, do they have enough money? You know, how they come up with having enough money is one thing, but do they have enough money? But I think experts all around, if you had a lot of money, and you might get a lawyer too.
The expense of stating a truism, you've said all along you'll be frustrated because even if you had that report, you couldn't do anything with it.
That's right.
But one thing that is a truism is if you don't have the report,
You can't do anything.
you certainly can't do
That's
anything
right.
with something you don't have.
That's right.
So at least if it's there, it's a tool, whether you get to
That's
pick
right.
it up or not.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And that's why I suggest to look at it and really understand it. And, you know, you can ask questions about it at meetings, and you can also, the NRC is gonna come up here when it's filed and do a public, whether they do a public, whatever they call it, it will be some kind of public event, well, they'll take public comment. So that's an opportunity, and I think that you need to stress to the public, it's really important that they go to that meeting, because the NRC will be there to listen. And even though whatever you say, you know, they're gonna go, yeah, thanks, but it's really important to know what's in it.
I have a question.
Heather?
Do you have any suggestions for us on how to get the community engaged? It just seems like it's the same people that show up for all the events, and it's so important.
Yeah, we have the same, I mean, we have the same people that come too. What we've tried to do, at least I've tried to do, is make sure that, you know, you get all the legislators at least know about it. We get the community, the leadership, and you folks seem to be really good about that, getting leadership from the town that's impacted there. One of the things too, and this is what, you have it on public access television as well, a lot of people watch, at least in Vermont, watch it on public access television, so they might not necessarily be sitting in the room, but I can't tell you how many people come up and tell me, like, they watched it, and I'm like, oh my God, you watched the entire 3-hour NDCAP meeting, but they do. So, you know, the vehicle to get it out there is more than just people sitting in here. It's the TV, and we have press at all of our meetings, and they write stories from our meetings, from every filing that's done, so that's another thing. And you may have, I think for a lot of people, they're gonna see, well, you know, it's not closed yet, what do we have to worry about, the decommissioning isn't started. But that's where I think that you folks can say to people, look what's happening in Vermont. They thought they had 50 years, you know, and now this thing's could start being decommissioned in 3 years.
Joe?
So,
Kate, would you have any recommendations for us regarding, once the PSDR is issued and we start to review it, what kind of a time frame might you suggest, if any, that we should plan on to try and put together our comments, recommendations, what have you, observations of it? We have in our statute a part of our mission is an annual report to the governor and the state and so forth. However, the PSDI could be issued at any time during the year.
right.
Rather than wait for an annual report to go forward. Any sense of a reasonable time frame that we ought to try and target, then to review it, put our comments together, and go forward with our comments, separate from the annual report, but it could be included as part of the annual report
Right.
at the end of the year if it occurred during the year.
Right. It's all really gonna depend on when Entergy files it. You know, and they have, I think it's, again, Mike and Joe are here, but you have like 2 years or something after the plant is closed to file a PSDAR. In our case, the plant closed, and I think it was about a month later that Entergy filed the PSDAR. So, and then,
But did it take you folks 6 months, or 3 months, or 9 months, or any
Well,
general sense of that?
it was, I'm trying to remember, there's a schedule too on when the NRC does the public meeting, and I can't remember. So you really have to do it, if you want it, your comments to be on the record with the NRC, it's on their timetable. I know the state went very quickly with these, honest to God, like 300 questions. They turned it around really quickly, but again, Entergy didn't have to answer the 300 questions. So to me, you're not gonna know when Entergy's gonna file it. So it'll happen when you least expect it. And then you're on the NRC timeline.
But that was a valuable tool in your judgment, putting those comments, questions together, because that then became public information.
That's right.
And identified to the public the kinds of concerns that you had.
That's right. And at the time, we honestly didn't know how important it was, you know, because there was our 3rd meeting or something when the PSDAR came out. So none of us, you know, knew what it was. So it is, it's, when it comes out, you should look at it right away and get the questions out so that everybody can understand what it is.
I'm looking at your past agendas, because I have
Yeah.
them all, trying to see it. I'll find
Yeah.
it. Any other questions, or? Yep.
Yes, one
Paul.
last question.
Yep, that's
Sorry,
okay.
Ms.
No, no.
Cage, you've been so informative. Thank you for your time. But as a public administrator, as selectman, and I'm sure you hold the trust of, the monies that you spend, and you could recognize, you could spend the entire decommissioning fund hiring experts on both sides, arguing until it's all gone. Ultimately, looking at the plants that were shut down in the regulated arena, doesn't it come down to the experts that we're counting on, the federal experts and the EPA, the NRC, our state experts, okay? Those are the people that set the standards
Yeah.
that we live to.
Well, and
So-
and this is my personal opinion right now, that's part of the problem, that's part of the problem, to be perfectly honest with you. And again, this is my personal opinion as a I have no nuclear background. It's hard when somebody says, trust us, and again, I work for politicians my entire life, so I've been on the end of when somebody has said, oh, trust me. So, you know what I mean? I'm not disparaging anybody who says, trust me, because I totally get it.
Or
But-
politicians in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think that is what's the problem, and I think that's what, with the public in Vermont, and with Vermont state government, and with people on our panel, it's when somebody says, trust me, there is enough money in the decommissioning trust fund for me to do the job. I can't show you the numbers that verify that, so trust us. So that's a really hard thing, because I think there's a fear that there's not gonna be enough money left, which means who's gonna be holding the bag? Well, the plant will go back into safe store status, but the trust fund money is out and no money is coming in, So that's why I think it's hard for people, you do listen to the experts, but it's when the people, in the industry sometimes who say to us, trust us, it's hard.
One follow-up question, not about the finances, but just to be certain, you do trust your state and federal experts as to the health standards that they set?
We do. I mean, and I'm not saying we don't trust anybody, because there are things that you have to believe. We're hoping, because it's the State Public Utility Commission that's going to set the site restoration standards. North Star has proposed site restoration standards, and it's going to be set, at least that's what North Star wants it set. So we're having our faith in the Public Utility Commission that they're going to do right by the people of the state of Vermont.
Let me ask you, I'm sorry, Senator.
I just, as somebody who's, gonna be a bit of a turd in the punch bowl here, this to me has nothing to do with trust, so I'm gonna push back a little on that.
Yeah.
It has to do with process determines outcome. You have a report that is being produced by someone by an entity that has an interest in a certain outcome. You have the report being reviewed by public and state entities that anybody who's served in state government, which I have, would absolutely know that they are underfunded and don't have the resources to put up against what that industry report is gonna say. I mean, let's be blunt about it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
isn't about trust. I trust these people, but I also understand that the process is absolutely weighted to not be an objective process. That's my concern. So I think the question for this group is, how do we guarantee it's an objective process? Not how do we have one special interest come up against another special interest? And I'm really concerned about that.
Yeah.
And I know what the resources of the state is. I could ask Kurt, do you have the resources at the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency to get nuclear experts there and really look at the post-shutdown activity report? The answer is no. So that's my concern, is, do you have equality in process that will lead to outcome that will serve the public?
Right.
It's not a trust issue.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we really grapple with, and that's why, for us, we've sort of evolved as a panel to see, to exactly what you're saying, because, you know, we didn't know what we were talking about in the beginning, and now it's like, now we know what we're talking about. And I think luckily for us in Vermont, we have a Vermont state government, you know, the agencies, the Public Service Department, the Agency of Natural Resources, the Health Department, and now the Attorney General are really, really involved in this. And whether they can make a dent in it is another story, but they aren't giving up, you know. The state of Vermont, the Public Service Department, Agency of Natural Resources, Health Department, and the Attorney General's office has filed a motion to intervene to try to get a public hearing with the NRC about the license transfer. That was so, you know, we don't give up there. And I think that's what you have to do. And I think that's what's, you know, part of the role of the panel is to bring these issues up. And that's why I say it gets really, really frustrating, because you can talk and talk and talk, and you're like, God, you know, where are we getting? But it's bringing these issues to light, because there's no other place to bring them to light. You know, this is a public forum, and it's a public process. And so you know, I think we are lucky because we do have resources beyond just ourselves. We have a state government that's you know, that's in it with us, and whether, you know, they can do anything, it's extreme. I get really frustrated with the NRC.
Let me,
You know?
let me hold up the questions for a second. To get down to a level of granularity about not only the frustrations, but the lessons learned so far. As you've heard, we've outlined 5 different working groups. We've covered a lot of what the PSDAR will be elected. The central problem with that, of course, is that Entergy will complete, or whoever might be the successor will complete something that fills in all the blanks, and so we'll deal with that.
Right.
But I'd like to take a few minutes, if you don't mind, and go through each one.
Yep.
What have you learned in safety and in security?
Safety and security is another thing that, you know, the emergency planning zone and all of that is under the purview of the NRC. The state of Vermont pushed back hard and said, can we keep the planning zone wider until the spent fuel is moved? And it was, no, you can't. But that doesn't mean you don't ask, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a little bit frustrating. And again, I feel like I'm a downer, but I'm just
No, no.
like senator over here.
That's assuming that we're up already about that.
Yeah. I know, I feel bad. You know, so we learned a lot through that, and there was some, and I do have to say that there was discussions between Entergy and the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And Entergy did put some money in for to the towns to do some more preparedness, longer than they needed to. So I do have to say that Entergy did that. So that was successful negotiations with Entergy to get a little bit more money that comes into the towns for longer than they had to do it.
Any other topics that you would think we should look at quickly relating to safety and security?
No, I think you should just understand what the schedule is on when the emergency planning zone and when the funding will end, and whether you think you might need some more, and negotiate that with Entergy.
This should be in your sweet spot as a chair of the select board chamber. What about the financial and economic? We don't spend enough time talking about that.
The impact of the plan.
Yeah, and what we should be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and I'll really quickly on this, the town of Vernon, which was the host community, their only industry or business at all was Vermont Yankee. So they were really hit hard on their tax base, and they had to cut their budgets, or, you know, their town budget. They had to eliminate their police force, so it hit them hard. You know, I live in Brattleboro, which is 10 miles away. We're the largest town in the southeastern part of the state. It hasn't hit us at all, and that's because we have a variety of industries. And so we were really ready for tumbleweeds to be going down our main street, but because I think we have healthcare, we have manufacturing, we have arts, we have, food manufacturing and breweries are big now up
Yep.
there. So we have a diverse economy, so we weren't relying just upon Vermont Yankee. So we've been
Any-
really lucky.
Any areas of frustration there yet at all in terms of?
Not, except for that, if you talk to the people in the town of Vernon, you will hear a lot of frustration.
Sean, can I just
Yeah,
ask a
please,
question
do,
about
Kev.
that? Because I think there's a significant difference between here and Vermont, and that's in terms of the money the state was able to negotiate.
We
If you
were-
could speak to that.
We were, when the plant, in the negotiations between the state and Entergy, that allowed Entergy to run the plant one more year before switching off the power, there was a memorandum of understanding, and the agreement was that Entergy would pay $10 million into an economic development fund for Windham County, which is the county that Vernon is located in. And that is $2 million over a 5-year period. And obviously, that's been of great help to us. But that was a special, I mean, you can ask Mike if he wants to give you money, but there were special circumstances behind us getting that money. And there was also money put into an energy, green energy fund as well.
Any other questions or?
I've got one
Yeah,
quick
on-
question.
Yeah.
Have you, in the process, I mean, I know that you got the notice in 2014, 2016, it closed down?
2014, it closed down. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you, and you just mentioned that about Vernon and how it was tremendously impacted, but other communities not so much. Has there been any identification of any entrepreneurship as a result of decommissioning that can be undertaken by members of the community?
Do you mean,
Starting a business, being a subcontractor to the decommissioning process?
no,
Providing a service, providing a, a product or whatever?
to the plant?
Well, to the decommissioning process,
Yeah,
once
well-
it starts.
Well, and again, this is gonna be up to North Star, but so far, Entergy has done work on the plant, they've taken down buildings and everything, and they do use local contractors.
They are gonna use local.
Well, Entergy has been using.
Do you have
local-
any provisions in North Star for them to use local contractors?
That would be between the state, and I don't think there's anything. We have had conversations with the CEO of North Star saying, realistically, how many people are gonna come in? It's not gonna be thousands of people, it's not gonna be hundreds of people. They're gonna be very specialized. So I've appreciated that they've been very honest and haven't said to us, oh, gosh, we're gonna come in and we're gonna hire thousands of people from this area. It's been very clear that the people that are coming in are very, very specific. The people they need are very, very specific. And they're not gonna be there for long term. We're not gonna have people moving in for, very few people will move in for 5 years. You know what I mean? So the jobs created, if there's a job created, it's there for a couple months. And they probably will, I can't see them employing very many local people. Because how many people know how to take a reactor vessel apart?
Did they have a proprietary security force at the Vernon plant before?
Currently, they contract out.
Or are they on a contract security force?
They contract out the security.
Contracted out? So
Sort of
this
good-
change in the spent fuel pad in terms of the minimization of security to a smaller area would actually mean less security jobs.
They don't tell us that information, but
Okay.
you could just sort of, so we don't get any of the details on how they deal with security.
If, it's a good segue, actually, into the site cleanup and restoration. You talked about the, gaining some knowledge on rubblization and the
Yep.
related ones.
Yep.
Any specific areas in that category that would be helpful?
Well, I can say that that's something you should get on top of sooner rather than later as well. And I know Massachusetts and the state of Vermont are different, and the Public Utility Commission in Vermont is the one that approves the site restoration standards. And North Star has asked for that approval at the same time that the sale is approved. So it's been a really short window for us. In fact, the CEO of North Star is coming to our NDCAP meeting tomorrow night to outline the site restoration standards. And you really, and this is sort of a lesson for Plymouth, the town of Vernon itself has been been grappling with what they think the site should be used for in the future. And obviously what you want to use the site for is going to sort of drive how clean it is. You know, whether it's so clean you can eat off of it, or whether, you know, it's an industrial standard. So that's the kind of thing, and obviously you don't own the site, you know, Entergy owns that piece of property. North Star will own the piece of property. But, you know, North Star has made it clear to us that they don't, or clear to Vermont that they don't want to own it forever. So how that site is cleaned up is gonna sort of drive how it's used in the future. So the town of Vernon has actually really just sort of gotten themselves together and said, you know, we want it cleaned up to a certain standard.
So Kate,
So-
that characterization is a key part of that, right? Because that will determine and feed into the cost model for
That's correct.
what is it gonna cost to clean the site up? So you really
That's right.
would look at that characterization, and then you could look at other sites and that experience from those other sites to see if those numbers align with what their projections might be.
That's right. So it's important to really sort of go backwards and say, what would we like the site to be used for, to figure out what the cleanup standard was. Now, of course, that doesn't mean Entergy or North Star has to clean them up that way, but at least you can make, you know, Vernon has now made their voice heard.
Any other
So-
questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just in terms of the sale. So Entergy's plan and North Star's plan is for Entergy to completely liquidate any
Yeah.
interest in the property itself. Has the state, in this negotiation, developed any interest in owning the property itself and having North Star do the work on it, so that there's that ownership control over the cleanup standard? Or, was that a discussion at all?
No, and I just want to take, but you mentioned something that I want to just highlight, and then I'll answer
Okay.
your question. What's going on in Vermont with the sale it hasn't happened anywhere else in the country.
Right.
What's happening is North Star or Entergy is going to sell or, you know, transfer the license to North Star. North Star is going to do the decommissioning, and then they are maintaining ownership of it, and they will be the ones that are responsible for the spent fuel in the
But
dry
there's
cask.
actually a transfer of the property title.
Yeah, yes, they're taking, well, yes, in essence, yes. But what I want to just highlight too is that in other instances where it happened out in Illinois, the Zion plant, Exelon transferred the license to Energy Solutions. Energy Solutions decommissioned it. Once it was decommissioned, it went back to Exelon. This is not happening. So this is the first ever such thing that's happening in Vermont, that North Star is going to be responsible for the spent fuel, you know, the dry casks. So but
But they have that.
yeah, and everything, I don't want to say everything, but pretty much North Star is going to own the property. North Star will own the property. Well, and whether they sell it to the town, I don't know if the state might have right of first refusal or something on that. I can't remember, or the town does. But it's really going to be North Star's property.
Yes, one last question.
Can you remind us of how large that site is in Vernon?
I don't want to, I don't know. I can't remember. It's small. It's just, Joe
It's
can
about
have some.
100, it's about 100, if I may,
Yeah.
it's about 177 acres.
Yeah. It's not large.
In keeping with the conversations that Kate and I had leading up to preparing for this. And you've heard it tonight that Kate feels strongly, I almost say passionately, about informing the public. We're going to expand the amount of time for public questions by a few minutes. And as we have in the past, in my unconventional way, by a show of hands, how many folks would like to ask Kate a question? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means you each will get 3 minutes. And last time we started with you, Mary, so this time we'll start over there.
My name is Chuck Adey. I live here in Plymouth.
Can you
Been a
spell your
mem-
last name, Chuck? So we make-
Adey.
Thank you.
And I've been a member of the Nuclear Matters Committee in the town for several years. But I was involved with the decommissioning of the Shoreham nuclear plant on Long Island. And as part of the settlement by the governor, he formed a new utility, the Long Island Power Authority, and the Long Island Lighting Company sold the plant to the Long Island Power Company, Long Island Power Authority. And they sold it, and they still own the plant today. When the Long Island Power Authority went to get the license transfer from the NRC, they were sent away because they didn't have any experience in the nuclear area. And they had to enter into a management agreement with the New York Power Authority at the time, who provided all the key managers that would run the decommissioning. But at the termination of the license, the Power Authority people all left, and the property still is owned by the Long Island Power Authority. So it has happened in the past.
Thank you. Rich?
Richard Rothstein, Plymouth resident, former member and chairman of the Nuclear Matters Committee. Hope you consider this a profound question. I know it's getting late. Kate, I want to thank you for being here and giving an update tonight. I find it incongruous that the NRC has rules and regulations for design, construction, and operating nuclear power facilities, old and newfangled facilities, that go from floor to ceiling. For every person sitting around this room, and I'm not going to profess over the past 45 years I've had the time to read all this stuff, but I do find it incongruous from what you were saying, Kate, that the NRC has not come up yet with a definitive rule or regulation for the approval of the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. I'm curious if either your panel or the state of Vermont has specifically asked the NRC as to why that has been the case, and if so, what kind of answer or response did you get? Was it a satisfactory answer? I realize that in 2019, as you were saying, something will happen there, but for the present, since life goes on, I'm curious of your response, if you have any.
Well, we've commented numerous times in writing and verbally that we think it should be approved. But if there's no rule, I mean, we've had, I've dealt with some really helpful people at the NRC, so I don't want to paint a broad brush. But if there's no rule to it, you know, they won't answer the question why there isn't. You know what I mean? It's like, well, why isn't there? It's because there isn't, you know? So you don't get an answer as to why there isn't. Part of it is, I think, I don't want to speculate, but we have made it really clear in our comments about the rules. We, the citizen members of the panel, as well as the state government, has made it clear that the PSDAR should be approved. And I can't, there's so many things, I can't remember, the staff at the NRC has made a recommendation moving forward whether that should happen or not. You know, it hasn't been adopted by anybody because it's a staff recommendation. And I can't remember if they're recommending that the PSDAR be approved or not. I have a feeling, and I shouldn't say it, but I have a feeling they haven't, because I remember reading it and getting upset about some of the staff recommendations. But there's really no answer. I mean, no one's going to tell us the answer.
I'm not surprised and I expected that response with all due respect.
Yeah.
I would strongly urge this panel at next month's meeting to politely ask Mr. Watson the same question and see if he can provide some insight in that regard. Senator Wolf, just to quickly respond to your comment about flood hazard concerns and hurricanes and lions and tigers and bears, which are very real, as we're seeing. And Entergy submitted a revised flood hazard reanalysis report to the NRC, I believe, 2 years ago, post-Fukushima. I don't know if that report has been reviewed, approved, what have you. It's been reviewed by the NRC, but that's something, that would be a good starting point, I think, just to take it from there.
Thank you, Rich. Jim? Oh, no, I'm sorry, I couldn't see in the back. Jim, let me put you on hold for a minute, yeah, I'm sorry.
You want my name?
Please.
Elaine Dickinson of Harwich, Cape Cod. And I'm with the Cape Downwinders. And maybe this question can't be answered by you, but from some things that I have learned, Massachusetts is different than Vermont because we've deregulated the industry, whereas Vermont has retained some rights. And I'm wondering how that might affect what we're all doing with the decommissioning of the Plymouth plant versus Vermont Yankee.
I mean, people from Massachusetts could answer the Massachusetts end, but we do have more of a role. I mean, the
Right.
state has to approve the sale. So obviously that gives another level.
Massachusetts, our state doesn't. Is that correct? Anybody here? I mean, it's something we should know about, right? Yeah.
I think you could say fairly accurately and generally speaking, we don't have nearly the teeth that Vermont has.
Right, so,
But there's a lot of different ways to get to the same endpoint, so it's early.
hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
Jim?
I'm Jim Lampert. I'm a member of the Duxbury Nuclear Advisory Committee. A question, there's been a lot of discussion tonight about getting information out to the public. And this question is not for you, Kate. It's probably going to be more for Kurt and John. We've talked about the public meeting law. And I was very happy to hear tonight that everyone has agreed that, yes, these do have to be public meetings when we get down to the subgroups. But that's not the only law that we have in the state books that deals with information available to the public. We also have the public records law. And anybody who has read that knows that the definition of a public record is extraordinarily broad. It would encompass, I have to go back and take a look to certainly everything my wife or I have sent to this committee. My guess is it encompasses all of the email correspondence between members of this panel on subjects that are relevant to the business of this panel. It certainly includes things that other people have sent to the panel. It includes things that are relevant that members of this panel may have sent out. Hopefully in the near future, we're going to get a short link, as Kurt put it, that we can actually look at the website. So my basic question is, I don't expect either of the vice chairs or anybody else to be able to answer it tonight. My hope would be that that website would provide the ability to get at what the state law calls the public records. And I'd love to hear at the next meeting or the November meeting what this panel's practices and what its intent is with respect to making those public records available to the public.
Thank you, Jim. Mary?
Mary Lampert, nice to see you, Kate, again. I look to Vermont for lessons learned. One lesson I think that has been learned is the problem the state has been a little late in Vermont in setting its cleanup standard. So therefore, Entergy initially said a 10 millirem, then North Star came in with a 15, and everyone's, you don't have anything clear there, which is key to how much it's going to cost. The state has the authority, Maine has done it, New Jersey has done it, et cetera. And so I think it's one point you might make or comment on, should this group get itself together and make a recommendation sooner rather than later. As far as emergency planning, you implied, I thought, I probably misheard you, that the state doesn't have authority, that NRC says it doesn't have to be done. However, I don't believe that's correct. There is a bill pending in the State House here that would require emergency planning to continue as is, and monies to go to Kurt and to the EPC communities, et cetera. Now, the state has authority not on safety issues, but on economic issues. And so the state then would have the authority to go forward to pass this bill. And so Kurt will have the money to do what he would have to do. And the EPC communities would get monies to do what they have to do, because the risk is clearly there. There's another issue that the state can do. And again, it's money. DPH is going to do environmental monitoring, we understand, for radiological issues. Who's paying? We know the budget is inadequate today, but who's going to pay so you can do the job in radiological environmental monitoring? Again, does the state have the authority to require that? There's a bill pending in the State House that addresses this. Again, it's economic issues. And so people may whine and moan and groan, oh, Entergy will sue, so we can't do it. Well, a good thing, go ahead and sue. The question is, who's going to win? And to try to get a few chips in our pocket to get some settlements. Vermont was smart. You had a lot of lawsuits going up there. So you had an opportunity to bargain and settle. So I hope this committee recognizes those facts. Another issue is the shrinking of the security area around the ISFI. For why? To save the money. I'm not blaming them for that. Experts, you could bring in Gordon Thompson, for example, and he can tell you precisely, and it's public record, what weapons are available today that can pierce these dry casts, what the consequences will be of that happening, talk about air security, et cetera. I think this committee should be getting on these issues now before it's a fait accompli. Lessons learned. The PSDAR, it's going to be essentially the same as the one for Vermont. So therefore, the committee should read it now, read the Attorney General's bluntly comments on what was wrong with it to get ahead of the game. You don't have to wait till you get your PSDAR, because I'm sure they've written it already. It's going to be the same thing. Thank you very much for your comment, and thank you for coming down and
Thank you,
sharing your
Mary.
experience.
Thank you. Do you have any comments on that?
I actually agree with Mary on some of it, and the site restoration standards have been sort of a little bit of a frustration with, especially with people on the panel, because it is something between the state and whoever is going to own the plant. One of the things that we're having an issue with, or the Agency of Natural Resources right now is having an issue with between Entergy, is the site characterization, which is, exactly what's on that site. Entergy rightly says they filed a report, but we're like, the report isn't updated, and Entergy says, well, and North Star, and we'll do more site characterization when we start the decommissioning. We're like, that's sort of backwards, So it's things like that some of us think you need to know what's exactly on the site before you start digging it up, and not wait till you're digging it up to figure out what's on the site.
Well, on behalf of the whole panel, if we want to keep it on time, one more question.
Really quick.
Yeah.
Are the decommissioning funds available for the research and writing of the post-shutdown? Is that eligible for funds from the decommissioning? Do they use those funds for that?
I don't know what they're, I don't know if Entergy has used the funds for that purpose.
And
So-
has anyone petitioned the NRC from your panel to actually use decommissioning funds as a source, as a resource for the state to
for-
actually, for you?
The
Yeah.
state of Vermont has a process that they can bill back Entergy on certain things. And we have discussed whether they can bill back on getting us experts. And the Public Service Department has said to us, we can bill back, but they don't want to, they want to really think about what they're billing back to Entergy.
But does the billing back go to the decommissioning fund, or does it go, is that another expense for Entergy?
Yeah, that's why people are like, well, if you bill back, it's coming out of the decommissioning fund. So that's sort of the,
One last question.
Yeah, as much an observation as a question. You've mentioned a number of times tonight the role of the Attorney General in Vermont. We don't have necessarily a direct line right now, the way we're structured with the Attorney General's office. So that might be something that we want to think about, is how we liaison with the Attorney General's office. But I don't know if
The
you have,
original legislation had that in there, but.
maybe even just inviting someone from the Attorney General's office to participate, even though they're not a member of the panel. So I don't know if you want to comment on the Attorney General's role.
yeah, they've been actually really, really helpful. And I think it's helpful having them not on the panel, because then they can sort of feel free to go wild on all the things that they're filing. The other people that you really should keep involved is your congressional delegation. We've been really great. We have 3 members, in our congressional delegation that are really, really active on a federal level. Senator Sanders has a bill in, speaking of PSDAR, to make it that the PSDAR has to be approved, whether it goes anywhere, but, they're working on it. And they are working, I know Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey are working with them on that thing. So your congressional delegation is involved. So you might want to get some staff people from there to come and really tell you what's going on a federal level, because they'll be exceedingly helpful.
Thank you.
With one more.
To add to the Senator's questions about expertise and so forth, I didn't hear, you mentioned, Kate, that you tapped the expertise in the state agencies and so forth, which is great, and we could do some of the same here in Massachusetts. But we have such an extensive college and university system in Boston, and I have to believe that there is a lot of expertise once we dive into the details of what kind of expertise we need. So whether there's funds available or not, but it seems to me that's a potential resource that we could tap that college and university assistants to work with us as partners representing the people of the state of Massachusetts to help us with that kind of expertise when we need it and identify it.
I just want to say one quick thing. We're actually having in our October meeting, some people from the New Jersey Institute of Technology who are experts on brownfields. And what we've asked them to do is take North Star site restoration standards. And we're not asking them to look at this as it's a nuclear site. Just pretend you don't know that it's a nuclear site. It's a brownfield. Take North Star's site restoration standards, take into account sort of the geology of the site, and tell us what the site can be used for in the future. Or tell us there's not enough information to know this. So that's the kind of, we're trying to use people and sort of think in creative ways, because they're going to come in telling us, this is based on what the North Star has said, this is what the site can be used for. Or North Star doesn't give you enough information to know that. So colleges can come in and very handy, and we happen to find brownfield experts. So that's.
I think the first thing that I think we'd all agree is how much we appreciate your candid, good-natured, honest appraisal of what's going on. So on behalf of all of us, well done. I know that Kevin and Jessica and others, the selectmen, would love to see you move here to Massachusetts. So if you change, Yeah, it's beautiful here.
It is. And I just have to say that we're happy, and I'm happy to either talk to people on the phone or email, or if you want me to come down again with other people from our panel.
Yeah.
You know, we're happy to keep you folks updated on what's going on here, because I truly do believe, and I have no insider information, that what's happening with us is gonna happen with you folks, and it's gonna go really way quicker than you think it's gonna. You still may be alive to actually see the site.
With that, you're free to go.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you.
Before we move to adjourn, I'm gonna ask for new business, but Joe, we haven't talked about this, but it's in that sweet spot, and I do hate to run long, but at the recommendation of some of our colleagues on the panel, I have had a conversation with Dr. Moniz from MIT, who was terrifically helpful, and he has put me in touch with other folks at MIT who have been equally helpful. One of the ideas that I was going to bring up and suggest at the November meeting, but you can start thinking about it now, because certainly Kurt can pick up the gauntlet on this. They, being MIT, is conducting a global look at nuclear power, including decommissioning and the future of nuclear power, in March. I had initially suggested to them that it might be a good idea for bringing them down, or us going up as a panel meeting to meet with them. And it does a lot of the things that we're talking about doing. I, for example, have looked up and have found about 117 members of the House and around 60 members of the Senate, who we can clearly show they have a cause and relationship with a facility in their constituency that at some point in the future would probably like to have stronger regulations, more public input, that kind of thing. That there is a time coming in the very near future where putting all of this together in some sensible way that's fair to everybody, that everybody gets a share, that it's not anti-industry or anti-people that are concerned. And one of the things that I'd like the group to think about over the next month or so is, would you be interested as a group in participating with MIT? Because I'm talking to the person that's running the program, and there is interest in doing a joint venture. Now, to that end, I know that, as you can see by all the satellite dishes out front, all the cameras, this attracts considerable interest for every meeting. And I appreciate, we all do, the time that everybody's put into it, including the public. But I would almost guarantee that come that time period, if we were to do something collectively with a multiple group of similarly situated organizations, particularly in the Northeast, with somebody like MIT, I think you might find a little bit more public coverage of this. So just think about it. Nothing is cut in stone. Feel has been put on both sides. And any other new business? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you again, Kate.
Only 6 minutes.
So, sure.
So whatever.
I know.